Whoa, I got a whole screen now. I can't see that. There we go. All right, welcome back. We're going to try to get this all taken care of a little quicker. We're going to start with the Free Methodist story. I'm sorry it sounds so boring, but when you're trying to teach a little bit of history, history doesn't lend itself to a lot of common conversation. So we're going to start with the Free Methodist story. I'll try to keep it interesting, and we should be able to finish here by the time that we need to finish. So if you're ready, we're showing a picture of a baptismal, and this baptismal is located in the Free Methodist, or the Methodist Church, sorry, in London. Now, on my set of slides, I have a picture of that church. It's right across the street from Westminster Abbey. But the interesting thing about it is I was there 2 years ago, and nobody's going to the Methodist Church. They're all wanting to see Westminster, where the kings and queens and everybody else is buried or crowned. So that seems to have more interest than the Methodist Church. Anyway, the picture you see is the baptismal in the Methodist Church in London, and it's the centerpiece is a stone baptismal that was carved by free slaves who were freed in the Caribbean, and they were set free as a result of the Methodist movement. Remember, we talked about John Wesley supporting William Wilberforce, and they gave this baptismal to the church in London as a gift of thanks. But it's encased in stone. In the Americas, it's even more of a hotter issue than it was over there at the time. So we'll go to the next slide. It's called A Movement Conceived, and we're going to look at a couple of things here. The social environment, B.T. Roberts and Ellen Roberts, and this new school called Methodism. B.T. Roberts was born in 1823. This is kind of a synopsis. He was trained as an attorney. He chose pastoring over teaching law, and he was ordained in 1848 in the Genesee Conference, the church that he was working with at the time, because the Free Methodist Church wasn't around yet. President Lincoln was elected president in 1861. The southern states in the United States started to secede and pull away from the Union. In April 12, 1861, the Confederate forces from the South fired on Fort Sumner, which was a northern fort, and that started our Civil War. And it took a little over 4 years for the Civil War to end. And so here's this kind of a, so now we're kind of looking at that part of it. I'm not sure how much interest that is to you folks, but anyway, 1840, women barred from World Anti-Slavery Convention and started a women's convention, beginning of the suffrage movement in the United States. 1868, Susan B. Anthony wrote their rights and had nothing, or the men in the revolution had nothing to do with women, their rights, and nothing less. In 1870, the 15th Amendment gives blacks the right to vote. Women still couldn't do that. In 1808, the Americans banned the African slave trade. So that wasn't that long ago. And there, let's see, Harriet Truman in 1849 becomes a predominant leader in the Underground Railroad movement. Dred Scott decision strips all rights from blacks free or slave in 1857 and so forth. 1865 Voting Rights Act ensuring federal intervention to allow the blacks to vote. So that's a little bit of the American history in that period of time. Now we're going to go to the next slide. Right. Benjamin Titus Roberts, who is the guy that started the Free Methodist movement and was born in 1823. That's a picture of him right there for you to see. He was trained an attorney and chose pastoring over teaching law. He was ordained in September 16, 1848 in the Genesee Conference of the Methodist Episcopal Church in New York. A little history, because we don't know much about the Methodist Episcopal Church anymore. The Methodist Episcopal Church was the oldest and the largest Methodist denomination in the United States from its founding in 1784 until 1939. It was also the first religious denomination in the United States to organize itself on a national basis. In 1939, the Methodist Episcopal Church reunited with two breakaway Methodist denominations, the Methodist Protestant Church and the Methodist Episcopal Church of the South, to form the United Methodist Church. And in 1868, the Methodist Church merged with, let me correct that, they formed the Methodist Church, right? In 1968, the Methodist Church merged with the Evangelical United Brethren Church to form the United Methodist Church. They were very concerned with holiness and social justice, a trademark of BT's early ministry. Key influences were Phoebe Palmer and John Wesley Redfield. His first pastoral appointment was Caryville, New York, followed by Pike, New York, and Roberts was married during his first charge. In an 1850 annual conference, Roberts was admitted to full membership and ordained a deacon. In 1851, he was sent to Rushford, New York, charge. Pastor there. During these early charges, Roberts demonstrated a concern not only for abolition, but also for the destructive effects of wealth upon Methodist livelihood. To Roberts, many out of the Methodists in his Genesee Conference, especially those in conference administration, example bishops and other clergy, were overly concerned with social prestige than with the old-time Methodist standards that aim for growth and holiness, as John Wesley himself had said. And Roberts also encountered leaders of what he has come to be called the holiness movements, individuals like Phoebe Palmer. And Roberts was also influenced by a Methodist evangelist called John Wesley Redfield. Next slide, please. And this is a lady called Phoebe Palmer. She was a Methodist evangelist and a writer who promoted the doctrine of Christian perfection. She's considered one of the founders of the holiness movement within the Methodist Christianity. And she was, this picture is taken in 1850. Obviously, she's not with us any longer. The Spirit fell upon me, she said, in an overwhelming degree. I received a power to labor such as I had never possessed before. This consecration has never been taken back. I have many times had to humble myself before the Lord for grieving his Spirit. I've been an unprofitable servant. It is by grace alone that I am saved. Yet the determination is fixed to obey the Lord, to take the narrow way, to come what will. That was recorded in the Earnest Christian in January of 1865. Palmer was one who prayed over B.T. Roberts to receive the Holy Ghost. Next slide. So influences. We mentioned John Wesley Redfield, a Methodist evangelist. He served at the university, Wesleyan University, and led a revival, and indicated that God has made me a rough man and given me a rough gospel for rough hearts. And the picture is his tombstone about 40 miles west of Chicago. Next slide. Here you have a picture of both B.T. Roberts and his wife. 1852, he was appointed to Niagara Street Church in Buffalo, New York. Major issue with pew taxes. He didn't like pew taxes. He wanted a free church. Segregation, commercialization, and discrimination were some issues that he was very concerned about. He tried to ban pew tax, but was unsuccessful. Now, pew tax was a situation where if you wanted to sit in the church, you had to pay a tax. It wasn't a free church. Not everybody could come in the church and sit down and worship. Instead, he bought a barn in Buffalo and began to hold free services. And Ellen did DWAG classes. I'm not sure what those were, for prostitutes, and they opened up reading and tutoring classes for people of color. That's what it was. I hear a noise in the background. I don't know what it is. He suggested that we favor amending the Constitution so that nowhere in the United States shall civil rights of any person depend upon his creed, condition, or color, inasmuch as that we have, as a nation, have been guilty of degrading the colored man by keeping the means of social and intellectual and spiritual culture out of his reach by the crushing of his aspirations for anything that can exalt or dignify. It now behooves us as Christian people to use all means in our power to provide for equality. Well, trouble brewed. The Buffalo Regency versus the Nazarite Union. So it was conservative reformers versus liberal accommodations. And in 1857, Robert wrote New School Methodism that criticized tax spirituality of Methodist leaders and was charged with immoral and unchristian conduct. But he was reappointed to Pekin, New York as its pastor. However, in 1858, he was stripped of his credentials after someone who did not like what he was doing republished New School Methodism in Pekin, the town, Pekin. Numerous churches within the Genesee condemned actions and supported and had support for Roberts, and many wanted to secede, but Roberts did not want to secede, pending the General Conference of 1860. Excuse me. Next slide. This picture was taken on August 23rd, 1860 in Pekin, New York. And this is one of the churches of that area. The movement was born under a apple tree out in the field in Pekin, New York. I didn't mean to imply that the picture was there. But the picture is a Free Methodist church in New York in the 1920s. There was no photos of the Layman's Convention in 1860. The original resolution forming the Free Methodist Church was presented in February 1st, 1860 in Olean, New York. And it says, resolved that we reiterate our undertaking or unfaltering attachment to the Methodist Episcopal Church while we protest against and repudiate its abuses and iniquitous administration by which we have been aggrieved, and the church scandalized. Our controversy is in favor of the doctrines and discipline of the church and against temporary maladministration. We exhort our brethren everywhere not to secede or withdraw from the church or be persuaded in any other ecclesiastical organization, but to form themselves into bands after the example of early Methodism and remain in the church until expelled, which they were. General Conference met on May 1860 in Genesee, New York, takes a pro-slavery stand, rejects holiness doctrine, and draws a line in the sand against Nazarites and lay movements. A Nazarite was a reference to an Israelite consecrated to the service of God under the vows to abstain from alcohol, let their hair grow, and avoid defilement by contact with corpses. Expel and close the door on early Free Methodist movement. However, meanwhile, since 1857, with Mr. Redfield and the Western movement had been forming church plants in Chicago and St. Louis as the main areas. The first Free Methodist Church was formed by Redfield in St. Louis, Missouri in May of 1860, leading the West with a network of local congregations. Well, early leaders believed that they needed to form a structure and support for a movement where healthy connection with the Methodist Episcopal Church was not possible. So Roberts called for a convention in Pekin, New York in August 1860 to do the following. Number one, in order to promote the prosperity and permanency of the work of holiness, to organize a Free Methodist Church on the following basis. Doctrines and usage of primitive Methodism, such as the witness of the Spirit, entire sanctification as a state of grace, district from justification, attainable instantaneously by faith, free seats, and a congregational singing without instrumentation, music in all cases, plainness of dress. 2, an equal representation of ministers and members of all the councils of the church. 3, no slaveholding and no connection with secret and oath-bound societies. Each society or band will be entitled to send on delegate at least, and an additional one for every 40 members. Well, there were 15 preachers and 80 laymen who attended that, and the documentation is in B.T. Roberts' biography, 1900, by his son, B.H. Roberts. Well, it wasn't universal, but Redfield said, "Brethren, when fruit is ripe, it had better be picked, lest on falling it bruise. In the West, we're ready for an organization. If in the East you're not ready, wait until you are." Well, Roberts at the end of the day said, we're ready, and the West and the East should now move in the manner simultaneously. It was approved with only 7 opposed, 2 laymen and 5 preachers. The doctrine became the Articles of Religion of the Methodist Episcopal, which was adopted by Wesley in 1784. And in August of 23rd of 1860, the Free Methodist Church is formally born, Layman's Conference, Pekin, New York, under the apple tree. Next slide. Okay, in order to promote the prosperity and preeminence of the work of holiness, to organize a Free Methodist Church on the following basis, which we just read, so we won't read it again. Okay, that just summarizes it for you. If you'd like to read it again, you can do that, but we'll move on. Next slide, please. Okay, there's 5 freedoms that the Free Methodist Church came up with. To free all people. Again, abolitionists were against slavery, and they at this time were still advocating the freedom of all people. Free with authority. In other words, the lay and the clergy alike lead the church, not just the clergy. Free in worship, as the Spirit leads in cultural contexts. Free from sin, the Spirit-empowered heart and lifestyle. And free from materialism. Classism rejected. They didn't approve of the class society, and simplicity would be embraced. So our mission is twofold: to maintain this Bible standard of Christianity and preach the gospel to the poor. This is the first mission of the Free Methodist Church on August 23rd of 1860. Next slide. The movement's phase was from 1860 to 1890, and it revealed new possible information that the people weren't thinking about. So the first one was church planting, 1,200 to 25,000 in 20 years. What we're looking at a lot in our society is, our conference is 30 churches by the year 2030, but it looks like if we reflect back on the past few years, it might be more than that. We've got over 30 right now. Then global missions is an important side of what we're doing and what was being done back then. Missions to move to around the world, not just in your local neighborhood to let somebody else do it, but to do it that way. The Underground Railroad was for freeing slaves. And the Earnest Christian was a paper that was published by B.T. Roberts for a number of years. The Chicago Publishing House was put together. I have a few books from that period of time, and it moved eventually to Winona Lake, Indiana, and then it moved to Indianapolis. Women, blacks, and lay were empowered. It was no longer just the pastors preaching and pastors making all of the decisions. It was equal representations between the people of the church and the pastors. And Roberts Wesleyan College was established during that period of time. So this is a very important time in regards to the Free Methodist Church, to the people, B.T. Roberts, the movement forward in feeling and understanding what the Lord had in store for them and what he wanted to be done. Next slide. This is the movement slows. There's movement from the Evangelical Methodist Church to the Free Methodist Church, which became a sect. The denomination then followed, and then there was a network being put together. Howard Snyder was a Methodist historian and theologian. He identified these phases 20 years ago, and the final upward trend is post-writing and a result of a new network of phases. So 1860, the church started, then you move up towards 1890, and all of that is the movement phase, which we just talked about. Then you have 1890 to 1950, which was the sect phase. And in the sect phase, there was a rejection. Well, B.T. Roberts died in 1893. There was a rejection of Pentecostal bands, a rejection of ordination of women. Wesley's inward and outward holiness became inward, not outward. Legalism was more prevalent. Foreign missions grew stronger. Then the denominational phase, which started in 1950 to 2000, was a shift from shared disciplines, and those were dress, no restriction, no instruments, entertainment, clear devotion pattern. The church was in a situation where the dress was very basic. The men wore coats and ties all the time, and the women wore long dresses all the time, and no lipstick and no nothing to cover on their faces. There were no instruments. There was no pianos. There was no guitars. There were no ukuleles. There was no instruments allowed in the service during the singing of the hymns. The Salvation Army, not the Salvation Army, the Mennonites have had a very similar up through the 1960s and the 1970s. Entertainment was very restricted. You couldn't go to the movies. I remember as a child, I couldn't go to the movies. Clear devotion pattern. Very important that you have a daily devotional, and to keep that going on a very strict basis. And individual convictions were in there as well. So it was politically conservative. None of this liberalism that's going on all now. Few from Methodists alive today understand and remember this transition, and I was right on the end of it. Fundamentalism versus modernism. We were very fundamental back in those days. We weren't modern at all. Mostly swayed toward conservative theology and suspension of social action. I don't remember my parents even talking much about voting. Strengthening higher education and major overseas emphasis was very strong at that time too. Now, the next phase is the network phase from 2000 on, post-denominational sentiments. So we didn't do much about what we talked about. There was a lot of conservative things still going on, but it wasn't as strong. There was a stronger view of vision and strategic priorities, more planning, more information coming across. In the past years, we've doubled in size. We're over 1 million, on our way to 2 million. Strong global missions, empowering indigenous leadership. And by that, I had the privilege of being on the first international missions team in Cambodia back in 2002. And it has proved that that was a very important part, because we used to bring the people to the United States to teach them. The problem there was that they would stay and they wouldn't go home, because they could earn more money in an hour than some could earn in a day or a week or a month. And so what happened was that it became important for us to send our missionaries and our people to the countries to teach them what you're learning here right now, so that they could teach their people. And we found it in Cambodia. It became a very important part of it, because it has grown significantly in the last 17 years. In the USA, a handful of growing denominations, 2% only every year. Next slide. Okay. These are photographs of pictures of people and places in the Sierra Pacific Conference, or with missions connections from people in Sierra Pacific Conference. So you'll see various different peoples in there. And the last picture is a conference picture from a family camp that we had several years ago. Next slide, please. Okay, we just talked about this. The Movement Reborn Global is over 1.2 million at this time. This is an older slide. 16 general conferences, 47 annual conferences, of which 25 are in the United States. So you can see that there's almost as many outside the United States as there is in the United States, and 37 mission districts. Hopefully, and some of those are becoming conferences as we are talking. Next slide. Within our organization, we have institution and agencies. The headquarters for the Free Methodist Church worldwide is in Indianapolis, Indiana. We have 9 colleges and universities that are either directly Free Methodist or supported by the Free Methodist or in affiliate. The picture that you see is Azusa Pacific University, where I graduated from a number of years ago. They have grown from, when I was there in 1965, we affiliated and transitioned into Azusa Pacific College, merging with another school because the 2 schools were so small they were having problems. And that was a student body of 600 the first year. They have now, I can't tell you how many they have, but I can tell you how they have about 3,600 on campus now, and they have many online schools and separate sub-campuses that work with the school. 3 affiliate seminaries and 12 social service agencies. Okay, next slide. You got it. Next slide, please. Okay, ministries of the Free Methodist Church, Free Methodist World Missions, which I have been a part of for the last 19 years, is an amazing thing that's going on, because we are finding that we are in 37 nations, plus we have what's called creative ministries in other countries, which we can't talk about to protect the people that are there. And so we talk about them as associations, but we don't talk about them as directly Free Methodist World Missions. VISA is Volunteers in Service Abroad, which is we can arrange through Indianapolis to have groups go to other countries to be missionaries for 2 weeks or a month. Then you have ICCM, which is International Child Care Ministries. In that, we support children all over the world through our donation of $30 a month, US. And we have Ethiopia, Cambodia, Thailand. I can't tell you all the countries that we're in where we are specifically ministering to children by helping them with clothing, food, learning. We establish schools in those places so that they can learn and grow up to be educated people. Seed Livelihood is a program where we employ people in different countries to make clothes and articles that they use in their own country, and we put them on the internet and they're sold and they can make money and earn part of a living that way. Free Methodist Youth Ministries is for teenagers, young people, to have projects and learn about Christ and to reach young people for Christ. Chaplains is an organization of chaplains for hospitals, chaplains for prisons, military chaplains, of which I am one, and we are still working in ministry, even though we may be retired or still employed. Quizzing is a program that is a lot of fun for teenagers. We memorize a book of the Bible, for example, the book of Mark, during a period of time. Every year, each book is memorized during that time, and then we quiz against other churches. And it's a really rewarding situation for the kids that do this, because you memorize the whole book of Mark to the point where you could almost quote it word for word. And then we set up a quiz with another church, and there's a person who asks the questions, and the first person on each team that gets up to give the correct answer then gets points for that, and the points add up to something at the end. Then there are camps. Now, this is something that not every country is used to doing, but we here in the U.S. enjoy a family camp every year when there's not the pandemic going around. We also have camps for seniors and camps for kids, and they're a lot of fun. You have an opportunity to mix with other people for a week and to share your life with them, to share your concerns, to share your share the enjoying things that you have with others, and to fellowship with them. And also there are times for recreation, and it's just a great time that people enjoy very much. Next slide. Some of the organizations that we have within our conference and other conferences are Red Latina, which is the Latin, the Spanish speaking folks in our conference, the African Heritage, which is very similar to that, only with the Africans. Women's Ministries is specifically for the women's. They have projects that they do during the year, and I also have a special lunch during the year where they meet at one church or another, and they have a speaker, and they also have a women's camp. I almost forgot about that. They have a women's camp every year where they do what we all do at camps. Men's Ministries, same project. Only the men, usually the times that I've been with them, we've gone to various churches, and we have done some destruction and reconstruction where we have built something that the church actually needs to help with their ministry. Then we have Healthcare Fellowship, which is about healthcare, and Urban Fellowship. And so they all are connections and networks that we have projects with. And then we have the last slide. So our strong belief is to believe, to belong, and to bless. We multiply spirit-led believers. We're looking for people who are spirit-led believers who lovingly belong to Jesus and undeniably bless their world, the world that they are living in. So we thank you for listening and being part of this. And do you have any questions on all of this we've done for the last 2 hours? Anything that I can answer questions about? I know you're just absolutely taken back with all of the fabulous information that we have presented to you. Is that right? Well, I'll tell you what. I know that I sent out an email with some reading material that goes along with this course. And I would be happy to send you some of that material, because you may not be able to access it from your location. So if you shake your heads or put your hand up or something, I will send those to you by email. Okay, very good. I will do that this afternoon, this morning for you, and you should have it by this evening, I hope. So thank you very much for listening